Shalom. I'm Eddie Chumney of Hebraic Heritage Ministries, and we welcome you today to this week's Focus Israel Report. In this week's report, we're going to be sharing with you regarding the reason for new elections in Israel that are now scheduled for March the 17th, 2015. On December the 8th, the Israeli Knesset voted to have new elections. They will be held on March the 17th. The vote was 93-0. In part, new elections came about from a disagreement among members of Netanyahu's government coalition over a bill to recognize Israel as a Jewish state that is also democratic. The Jewish state bill passed in the Israeli cabinet 15-6. Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu explained the purpose of the Jewish state bill by saying that the Jewish nature of Israel is increasingly being challenged. The Palestinians refuse to recognize this, and there is also opposition from within. There are those groups who want to have autonomy in the Galilee, in the Negev areas of Israel, and who deny Israel's national rights, Netanyahu explained. It cannot be that the Arabs can live in all communities in Israel, and Jews cannot live in Arab communities. What is evolving here is a state within a state. The state of Israel is the national home of the Jewish people, in which it realizes its aspiration for self-determination in accordance with its cultural and historical heritage, states the bill. The right to realization of national self-determination in Israel is exclusive to the Jewish people, Netanyahu said. Israel is the nation where there are equal rights for every citizen, but there are national rights only for the Jewish people: a flag, an anthem, the right of every Jew to immigrate to Israel, and other national symbols, he says. The Prime Minister has promised to amend these last passages, however, to make the Jewish state law more moderate. In his version, Israel's character as the Jewish national state and its democratic nature receive equal weight. In the current version, Israel's Jewish character is placed before its democratic nature. However, the current version also states clearly that Israel is a democracy and that it respects the rights of all of its citizens. People ask, who needs this bill? We have managed 66 years without it, Netanyahu said in the presence of reporters. Israel is a Jewish democratic state. There are those who want democracy to take precedence over Judaism, and there are those who want Judaism to take precedence over democracy. In the draft law that I am bringing, both principles are equal and must be given equal consideration. Israel has always been a Jewish state, but all citizens have equal rights under the law regardless of race, gender, or religion. However, only the Jewish people have national rights in Israel, and that needs to be anchored into Israeli law. I also don't understand those who call for two states for two people, but at the same time oppose anchoring that into law. They are quick to recognize a Palestinian national home, but adamantly oppose a Jewish national home. Both laws state that Jewish law will serve as a source of inspiration for Israel's lawmakers and courts. Should a judge fail to find a solution for a judicial issue, it says he should decide it in accordance with the principles of freedom, justice, honesty, and peace of the heritage of Israel. However, two senior ministers in Netanyahu's government opposed the Jewish state bill. They were Israel Justice Minister and Chief Negotiator in the peace process with the Palestinian Tzipi Livni and Israel Finance Minister Yair Lapid. They pledged to not vote for the law when it was presented before the Israeli Knesset. Livni said, "I will not support this bill or give a hand to it." Yair Lapid also pledged that he would vote against the bill. Lapid said, "The bill submitted today puts the Jewish state before democracy. Neither I nor my political party will vote for this law." Netanyahu addressed threats and ultimatums by his coalition partners to break up the government over this and other issues, saying, "The country cannot be run with threats and ultimatums." The leader of the religious Zionist Party Jewish Home, Naftali Bennett, said, "If the Jewish state bill doesn't pass, then Israel won't have a ruling coalition. Everything will fall apart. All coalition members signed a coalition agreement when forming the government, so I expect everyone to keep these commitments." Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas said that the proposed Jewish state bill places obstacles in the way to achieving peace. The Palestinian Liberation Organization strongly condemned the bill, claiming it is aimed at destroying the two-state solution. A statement issued by the PLO Executive Committee said the bill is designed to implement the Greater Israel Plan in the Jewishness of the state on the land of historic Palestine. The so-called historic homeland of the Jewish people is a racist and ideological exclusionary attempt to forget the Palestinian historic narrative and abolish Palestinian existence. Because of the disagreement within Netanyahu's government coalition regarding the Jewish law bill, Tzipi Livni said, "The government of Israel has reached a crossroads. We need to stop the violence, the racism, the incitement, and the fight against difficult bills, or go to the voter and let them choose between two paths, between two different worldviews," she said. "Our path is clear. We simply need to stop the extremists, some of whom are in the Israeli Knesset, some even are in Netanyahu's government. This government needs to be replaced because it doesn't know how to fight terror while upholding freedom and Zionism." Livni said that she was going to meet with Netanyahu over the Jewish state law issue, but she will refuse to compromise on any of the values that guides her. Because of the rebellion against his policies within his own government coalition, Netanyahu said, "In the diplomatic arena, for example, certain cabinet ministers regularly attacks the policy that I have directed and for which I was elected. They have made a controversial issue even out of construction in Jerusalem, thereby strengthening the international criticism of Israel. Those cabinet ministers who attack the government and its leader are trying to replace the prime minister of the government in which I govern. They violate explicit agreements reached in forming the government coalition, such as a real increase to the defense budget and the transfer of Israeli army bases to the south of Israel. I demand that these cabinet ministers stop the subversion and the attacks," Netanyahu said. "If they agree, the government can continue. If they refuse, we will come to our own conclusions and go to the electorate. A government cannot function when its cabinet ministers constantly work against the policies of the government and attack the government of which they are a member of from almost every direction and on every issue. I have not received even the most basic obligation, and that is the loyalty and the responsibility of cabinet members to the government in which they serve," Netanyahu said. As a result, Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met with his finance minister Yair Lapid and presented him with 5 conditions for maintaining the current government coalition. And they were as follows. Number 1, stop undermining the government, especially over construction in Jerusalem and relationship with the United States. Number 2, transfer as promised 6 billion shekels to the defense budget for training and procurements, including Iron Dome and heavy APCs. Number 3, free up funds to the Israeli army's planned relocation to southern Israel. Number 4, support the Jewish nationhood bill as formulated on the principles presented by the Prime Minister. And number 5, freeze the 0% value-added tax proposal, instead using the 3 billion shekels previously allocated to produce real housing solutions to reduce prices. Minutes after Netanyahu published his list of demands, Lapid said that the Prime Minister was dragging Israel to unnecessary elections with demands that were impossible to accept. Israel Justice Minister Tzipi Livni said, "It is wrong to advance racist legislation and allowing extremists, some of whom are in the government coalition, to have their way." Because of their rebellion, Netanyahu decided to fire Tzipi Livni and Yair Lapid from their government positions. As a result of firing Yesh Atid's leader Yair Lapid, all of his party members who were government ministers quit their jobs. Netanyahu instructed his cabinet secretary to issue termination letters to the 2 senior ministers, citing constant criticism aimed at him and his government from both Livni and Lapid. In firing them, Netanyahu said, "In recent weeks, including the last 24 hours, ministers Lapid and Livni harshly attacked the government under my leadership. I won't tolerate any more opposition within the government. I won't tolerate ministers attacking from within the government's policies and its leader." Regarding Lapid, Netanyahu said that he undermined Israel's aggressive policy against Iran's nuclear program by criticizing the Prime Minister's decision to boycott Iranian President Hassan Rouhani's speech at the UN General Assembly. Lapid undermined the government's policy to demand the Palestinians to recognize Israel as the nation-state of the Jewish people when he said in an interview that he didn't think it was necessary to make that demand, Netanyahu said. Both Lapid and Livni, the Prime Minister added, criticized plans to build some 1,000 housing units in Jewish neighborhoods in Jerusalem located beyond the Green Line, with Livni saying the move was irresponsible. Well, Livni is the last one who can preach to anyone about responsibility, Netanyahu said. In May of this year, she met with Mahmoud Abbas in complete contrast to the Israeli cabinet decision not to meet with him at the time, as well as against my explicit order not to hold the meeting. Later, she went on to say, while serving as the justice minister, Netanyahu's boycott of Abbas is stupid, and today she once attacked the government under my leadership. He also accused both Livni and Lapid of trying to seduce the ultra-Orthodox parties to remove him from power. Netanyahu said, in recent weeks, both Livni and Lapid have joined forces to lure the ultra-Orthodox parties to remove me as the Prime Minister of Israel while sitting in my government. By the way, these are the same ultra-Orthodox parties that Lapid frequently claims that he refuses to sit with in government. It is a violent overthrow of a government, and it is impossible to run a government with these things happening, Netanyahu said. Ultra-Orthodox Knesset member Nassim Ze'ev from the Shas party said that Yesh Atid chairman Yair Lapid indeed approached the ultra-Orthodox parties trying to organize an effort to remove Netanyahu from power. However, Ze'ev said Lapid did not directly approach Shas, but rather sent messengers to the party's members in order to find out whether they were willing to form an alternative government. Before calling for early elections, Netanyahu held a meeting with Israel Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman in an effort to convince him to form an alternative government coalition with the ultra-Orthodox parties and thus avoid early elections. However, Lieberman has long been opposed to joining up with the ultra-Orthodox parties and declined Netanyahu's offer to have an alternative government with them. Lieberman is a man of his word, and if Lieberman said that it's either this current government coalition or new Israeli elections, then there is no chance that there will be something else, a representative said. Netanyahu also talked with the two ultra-Orthodox parties about being in his government. However, in order for the two ultra-Orthodox parties to join the Netanyahu government, Israel Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman would have to soften his position on the issues of the ultra-Orthodox serving in the Israeli army and change his position on the conversion law. Lieberman refuses to do this. Therefore, Netanyahu's efforts to convince Lieberman and the ultra-Orthodox parties to form an alternative government did not succeed. As a result, Netanyahu said that he was going to call for early elections. Netanyahu urged the people of Israel to provide him with a safe majority from which he could lead the country. Netanyahu said, I turn to you, the citizens of Israel, this evening, because under the current situation from within the current government, it is impossible to lead the state of Israel. My responsibility as Prime Minister of Israel is to do just that. Well, that's going to conclude this week's report, where we shared with you the events that led to Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu calling for new elections in Israel that will be held next year on March the 17th. Until we do it again, Shalom in Yeshua the Messiah. Amen.